Hi, I'm Larry Mishler, and what we're going to do is talk about photography, or at least the beginning of photography. We're going to talk about large format cameras. We're going to talk about the development of the shutter. We're going to talk about wet plates to dry plates and how the photography developed. And we're all going to do this through Larry's lens. Hi, this is Through Larry's Lens, and I'm Larry. I'm Larry Mishler, and this is photography before digital. And what we're going to do in this multi-part series is to tell you about the development of film cameras, and a little bit about photography and where it started. And would you believe it was about 200 years ago that the first images were made? It's hard to believe, but that's the way it is. So let's get on with it. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. My family moved here from Kansas. We're in Arizona now, thank God. Anyway, we moved here from Kansas to Arizona in 1949. I was a young kid, and my dad went out, and we were staying in a motel, and my dad went out, and he came back and he said, "Guess what? I bought a camera shop." And my mother said, "But Russell, you don't know anything about cameras." And he said, "Well, I can learn." So hence, we started in the camera business. Now, my dad was a great influence on me, and I really attribute a lot of my interest in photography started with him, because at 9 years old, I was asked to, after school, work in the camera shop, sweeping floors and everything. And so I got to know about cameras, and so that's how I started. Now, the collection you see here of cameras is how we're going to do this. And I'm going to show you the progression of photography as it happened through film and the cameras that made them. Some of these things are really huge, and I'll explain a little bit later about why the big cameras. So anyway, let's get on with it. Photography started off as not capturing any kind of an image. People were not too concerned about things, but there was a guy, a Frenchman, back in France in the late 1500s, that was laying on his bed in his room, and he had a hole in his window shade, and he was looking at the wall and saying, "My wall's moving." And then he realized that it was the image from across the street that was being projected on his wall. He became very intrigued with this and discovered that if you took a piece of paper and held it up there and had a way to steady it, he could trace that. And that was an amazing thing. And so all of a sudden he became an artist, because he was able to draw very realistic things on paper that no one else could do. So that's kind of the start of that. Then a couple of guys came along, and they developed this, because they couldn't take his room everywhere. They developed this box with a mirror in it, and basically the same thing as a room. And so what they did is they had this, and it's called a camera obscura, and this is a slide of the camera obscura, what it looked like. It had a mirror in it and a lens, and you put a piece of paper in there and you could draw on it and replicate the colors and everything else. So it was really kind of a neat thing. An Englishman, Tom Wedgwood. He was the son of a very famous potter, and I think they have dishes that they're Wedgwood dishes and Wedgwood stuff like that even today. So it's an old company, and I believe it's English. Anyway, back in the 1700s, the late 1700s, almost the 1800s, he noticed that if he took silver nitrate and he exposed that to leather, white leather, or to white paper, which they didn't have very good paper then, he could take that and put a coin or other image on there and expose it to light, and it would get dark around the images, and then when he'd take those off, he'd have a silhouette of that image. And it was very interesting because no one was able to do that. The only problem is, as he let it go, the whole thing would turn black. So it wasn't very permanent. And he didn't do too much about that. But then there was a guy by the name of Nitzipor Niepce. And old Niepce, he was one of the first guys. In fact, he was in the early 1800s, and Nitzipor Niepce made the first real negative. And he was really disappointed. He was using some of the same similar techniques. But what he would do is he would go and he would take silver nitrate and flash it with mercury at 167 degrees, and the vapors would develop the image. Well, he looked at this, and I think he probably died of mercury poisoning, and a lot of these people, were dealing with really dangerous stuff, and don't try this at home. So anyway, he looked at this thing and he said, "Oh, I have an image, but it's in reverse," and he was very disappointed. And he didn't realize that what he had done is to make a negative. So the first negative was made in 1816, which is 100 or 204 years ago. Wow, the first negative was made. And later on, he got with Louis Daguerre, another Frenchman, and Louis Daguerre was the developer of the tintype, and he had figured out a little more sophisticated technique, and he was holding it very secret because he wanted to make a lot of money. But the French government was so interested in the development of this research of photography that they bought him out and gave the whole thing to the world. And it's a good thing because it really spread then throughout the world, and people started doing a lot more of experimenting with things. And it even went into America, which we were doing other things, and and so Niepce died, and Daguerre kept going on and developed the tintype and the wet plate. Now, for a long time, wet plates meant you take a piece of glass and you put some kind of emulsion on it. It could be, there was embryo types, there was calotypes, and there was many different kinds of emulsions, but they all had to be wet. And you had to have a dark place that you could apply the emulsion, put it into a holder, put it into the camera, make a 20-minute exposure, and then develop the thing all before the gelatin or the calotype or whatever it is, before the image got dry. And then they'd have a negative. And when mounted on black paper or black felt, that a lot of them did, it would appear to have, and you look at it, it would look to be a positive image because of the reversing. So wet plates went on for a long time, and even in the Civil War, Matthew Brady made several hundred photographs. And people said, wait a minute, how could he make all these photographs? Because they all have Matthew Brady's name. Well, what he did is he hired a whole bunch of photographers. But when they brought him back to him and all the glass plates and all the negatives and so forth, he put his name on it. So the only photographer you'll ever probably see during Civil War stuff, or if you look at the Smithsonian, you'll see they're all Matthew Brady. Okay, as I mentioned before, exposures were like 20 minutes long. And if it was during hot weather, it didn't get a picture, or it had only a partial image when part of it started to dry. So, and there weren't any shutters on cameras. What they had were just a regular lens like this, and to make an exposure, they would pull the lens off and count. or use their pocket watch or something, and then put it back. But as dry plate became possible, there were experimenters that came up with emulsions that were on dry plate. In fact, George Eastman was a bank teller, and his hobby was reading about all these emulsions that you could do. And so he, in his hobby at home, when he would do that, he'd start developing dry plates, and eventually made Eastman Dry Plate and Film Company, and became very successful. So anyway, what they did then is they had to develop shutters, because the wet plates were very slow, but the dry plates were much faster, required much slower, much less than 20 minutes exposure. So this is one of the first shutters that was made, and it was made by a guy by the name of Packard. It's called the Packard shutter, and it was pneumatic, and you have a squeeze ball, and none of the squeeze balls work anymore because of age. They just really got hard. So anyway, like the one on this camera here, it works that way. Okay, what happened was you would close the shutter, and you'd squeeze the bulb, open it, and close it. Open and close it. And it made it much easier for reliable shutters. Well, when cameras first started becoming made with good lenses, good shutters and everything, it was a combination between craftsmen, between watchmakers and cabinet makers and all these things. And so they'd go out and they made these elaborate wooden cameras. And here's one right here. Here's a Connolly. This thing sold from Eastman Kodak Company. This is a 5x7, which means that the negative image back here is 5x7 inches, and that's the ground glass. Well, the images had to be big because the only way that you could make a print from the negative was on a contact printer, or they would take the paper and sandwich it with the negative and expose it to light and then develop that. If you wanted an 8x10, then you had to make an 8x10 camera. This camera right here, this is an 8x10 camera. And this is made by Eastman Kodak Company, and it was made about, I think it was made about 1920, 25, something like that. Okay, this particular camera belonged to my high school instructor, and his name was Mickey Portillo at Mesa High School. And he happened to be one of General MacArthur's photographers during the Second World War. And I learned a lot from him. I learned a lot from my dad, but he took me on because I already knew how to make negatives. I already knew how to make contact prints, and I was a good service to him. He didn't have to train me. And he was always very happy about that. 2 years after I graduated from high school, I remembered this view camera. And I went back to him and I said, Mickey, would you like to sell that camera? And he says, yeah, I'm never going to use it again. Maybe you'll use it. And so he sold it to me for $100, which was a lot of money in 1950, 1960, I guess it was when I bought it. But anyway, he was a great guy, and I'm really happy that I got this camera from him. A little story about that. I was a sports photographer for the Tempe Daily News, and I was at a game one time, and this was during, it was just before Thanksgiving, and one of the other photographers said, hey Larry, you have a large format camera, an 8x10. I said, yeah. And he said, I got a job for you. What would you charge me to get a picture of Superstition Mountain with all nice clouds and make me a 36 by 5 foot print? And I thought, wow. I said, yeah, I could do that. And he said, well, what would you charge me? And I said, oh, I didn't know whether I could do it or not, so I said, $300. He said, do it. It's for my dad for Christmas. And I said, wait a minute, that's about a month away. And he said, yeah, is that a problem? And I said, well, I don't control the weather, so I don't know if I can get clouds between now and then. So anyway, I'll show you what we did. I went out. The next day, I looked around and said, oh my goodness, this is great. Nice sky and everything. So I took this camera out, went out in the afternoon, and shot 2 frames and 2 negatives like this. This is a contact of that. This negative makes that contact. Okay. So we went out and made the print. I went back home, developed the film, and it looked like we had a good one. So I went to a friend of mine who was working for an engineering company, and they had this huge enlarger. So on Monday, we made 2 36 by 5 foot prints. This is where the cropping, as you can see, what we had. And developed the prints, rolled them up. I called him the next day and I said, got your picture for you. He said, really? So he came over, he looked at it, he said, it's exactly what I wanted. So anyway, my first job in shooting the 8x10 to make any money out of it. Anyway, it was a great deal. It was a lot of fun, and it was a great camera. I still use this, and most photographers my age still do a little film. It's kind of like when you're in the dark room. It's a very personal thing. You get used to the chemical smell. You get used to all the film and all the you get used to doing things. Even though I do a lot of work digitally now, I still use film. In fact, let's see. Let's look at this. Speaking of cameras, this is a camera that my dad bought, 1953. This is a Linhof 4x5 Super Technica. This is a press camera like most press cameras, but it has the thing is that it has the versatility that you can change lenses very quickly. And you can adapt and put the lens on just like that. And it has swings and tilts, so it's like a view camera to correct parallax and distortion and that kind of thing. But it also has the ability to act as just a regular press camera or a candid one that's more portable. It also uses film holders, and it has a ground glass. You can focus on the ground glass. Okay, here's a film holder that the 4x5 uses. It goes in the back like this, and you pull the slide, cock the shutter, and make the exposure. When you take it back, do you notice there's a dark side and a bright side? The bright side means it's unexposed, and the dark side means it's exposed. So when you go in the dark room, it also has some little bumps on there. So if you're in the dark room and you're feeling along the top here and you say, oh, that's good film, so you don't develop that. On the ones that have the dark slide out, that's the one you develop. Okay, as we were talking about press cameras like this, let me show you another press camera. This is the one I used in high school. Started out in high school. This is the Speed Graphic, and this is it has the capabilities of being has some swings and tilts. It has a little rise on here so that if you're shooting a picture of a building and you don't want it to look like it's toppling over to the center, you can actually take that and raise the lens board in the front, like like that. And through that, it changes the angle of the lens. Anyway, or if you're shooting sports, you don't have time, you can look through here and shoot that. Now, there was a problem with this, and I will show you. When you go out and you're shooting, this is what you have to have. Got the film bag with flash bulbs inside, because you're going to shoot football or something like that. You got to have that. I'll tell you where a little secret is. The reason why people modernly put their hats on backwards like this is because they get up close to their camera, especially the videographers, the ones that are shooting video. They can hold that like that. But that's where the whole thing started, wearing your hat backwards. It's all from photography. So if you have your hat on straight, you must not be a photographer. Anyway, this was a lot of stuff to carry. And when I was in high school, I weighed about 115 pounds. And the camera equipment weighed about 20. And so that was a great deal of my weight. But, and the thing is, you only have 2 photographs for each slide. So you had to carry your film bag with you like this, so that you had all your extra film in your film bag and all your flash bulbs. Now, one of the greatest things, when I was a senior in high school, our high school bought electronic flashes, so I didn't have to carry any flash bulbs anymore. And that was a great deal. Okay, so how I got into shooting sports, I did it in high school, but after I graduated from high school, my dad was shooting ASU, actually it was ASC at the time, Arizona State College, and he was shooting football, and everybody used press cameras. He almost got run over by one guy one time, and so it kind of shocked him, and he said, I tell you what, you can have my pass and my camera if you want to go and shoot football. So I started, and for 25 years I photographed ASU football. And at first just for kicks. What we would do is we would get a good picture and we'd blow up about a 16 by 20 and we'd put it in the window of our camera shop. And so people would come by and they'd look at all the pictures. And that was a good way to advertise that we did photography, we did commercial photography, and we did portrait photography. I graduated from high school in 1957, and my dad, I think it was about that year that he said, you know, go ahead, you start doing that. You start taking the pictures. So anyway, we had lots of fun doing that. When I was in high school, my first photography gig was a basketball game, and Mesa High was playing Phoenix Union, and the senior member of our photography team, his name was Ron Lenhart. He was a little bit put out that I was, you know, even given an assignment. So I said, well, you tell me what to do. And he said, okay, go sit down under the basket and wait for him to come down and shoot the picture. So I said, oh, okay, that sounds easy enough. So I'm down there and I've got my camera up like this, and I'm seeing these guys that are 6'2", 6'3", 200 pounds come running down and they're running full blast at me. And I'm going, this doesn't look right. So I got the picture and I tucked under like that, and the Phoenix Union, the head of the Phoenix Union football team saw me and went to jump and caught his foot under and he fell over, knocked him out. He was out for the rest of the game. Mesa High won that game. It's the only time I got cheered. But it was a learning experience, so you don't sit right under the basket as I was told. And Ron later apologized and said, yeah, I guess I should have told you to get off to the side just a little bit because they run through. So there's a lot of things. It's a lot of fun to shoot sports. I had a great time shooting sports, and it was lots of fun. So next thing I'll show you is, now these cameras are all fairly late. Earlier cameras like this. Now this is a box. This is a 4x5 camera, but it also is a single lens reflex. And this camera is like this. This is what the Life magazine photographers started with. This was a great camera. This is a telegraphic. It's made by Graflex, had a Kodak lens, and it also has a focal plane shutter. Now the focal plane shutter, like most of the mechanical shutters, are spring-loaded, which means that they would go and you'd cock the shutter, and as I said, some of the cameras were made by a combination between watchmakers and carpenters. So the watchmakers discovered that you could only wind a spring so tight, and to get a maximum shutter speed, about 0.05 of a second was fast enough, was as fast as they could do it. So what they did is they said, well, we need a faster shutter than that. We need hopefully 1,000 or even higher than that. And they couldn't figure out how to do that with a leaf shutter that would open and make the exposure and then close 1,000th of a second. So what they did is they did this. I'll fold this up for a minute and show you the focal plane shutter. Now, focal plane shutter, it's located at the focal plane where the lens is focusing, right in front of the film. And this is a curtain. And this curtain, I haven't used this in so long, opens like this, and the curtain has different size slits. I'll wind the shutter up, and here we go. How about that? So what happens is that the shutter travels at a very fast rate and gives you the equivalent of 1,000th, or this one goes up to, it has a little graph here on the side. It has a scale on the side of the camera that tells you how far to wind this and to what spring tension to put on it to get the desired shutter speed, because there's different slots. The smaller the slot, the faster the shutter speed. So that is a focal plane shutter. And this was very, very important for sports, because many of the sports cameras, sports photographers needed the very fast speed to stop action. Now, every once in a while, you'll go and you'll see a picture of a race car. Some of the old pictures of the race cars looks like they were leaning. And the phenomena of that was, as the curtain went down, the car was moving, so it actually skewed the image of the car. So it made a kind of a funny thing. And if you were going in the right direction, it would make it look like it's leaning forward or leaning backwards, depending on which way the camera was set up. So anyway, that was a wonderful thing. That's a 4x5. This thing weighs about, I don't know, it must weigh about 20 pounds. But, and then you had to carry the film along with it. So, one of the other things about it is most people stopped using speed graphics and bellows cameras, and they started using cameras that were were smaller Rolleiflexes. We'll show you some of those in a future part. But I had a friend that my dad was real good friends with, and his name was Russ Spavin, and he worked for the Arizona Republic and Phoenix Gazette. And he was a Phoenix Gazette photographer for many, many years. He used to shoot all of the Chicago Cubs for their program when they came here for spring visits. He was the last person to use speed graphics, and this is his speed graphic. And if you see on the front here, I don't know if you want to get this, it says Republican Gazette, Russ Spavin. And he was the last photographer, I think in the United States, perhaps in the world, that used a speed graphic for everything that he did. And he says, I know the camera and I want to do it. And so he used this up until the time that he retired, which I think was probably in 1980s. So it was, and his wife, after he passed away, they happened to be our next door neighbors also. And after he passed away, his wife came to me and said, Larry, do you have any use for his camera? And I said, my camera collection would love to have it. And so this is Russ's camera. Another thing that happened, and I'll tell you about this, one day, and I was about 10 years old at the time, and Russ Spavin came into the camera shop and said, we oftentimes would keep his camera there, and he came in to pick up his camera and he said, hey, I'm going out to Queen Creek. They're having a flood out there. And he says, do you want to go with me? And I said, sure. He said, well, bring your cameras. And I brought along this little Ansco Radio Flash, was what I had taken on vacations, and this was my camera. So we went out to Queen Creek, and he shot a bunch of pictures, and I shot a bunch of pictures, and we came back, and he went into the darkroom to develop his pictures, and he came out and he had this startled look on his face. And I said, what's wrong? And he said, have you developed your film? And I said, no, I still have 2 exposures left on there. And I was kind of frugal and I wanted to use them all. And he said, can you develop yours right away and see if you got anything? And I said, why? What's wrong? He said, I didn't have any film in my film holders. He had forgotten to load the film and he was in such a hurry. So I took my film and I rolled it past. It's an 8 exposure. It uses 620 film, 8 exposures, and I had only taken 6. So I developed the film and I said, yeah, I got some pretty good shots. And he said, okay, let me borrow the film. He said, I'll give you a photo credit. So at 10 years old, I had my first publication in the Phoenix Gazette, flood in Queen Creek, and I was really happy. And I didn't ask if I could get paid for it, but I was just happy to have it published. Later on that summer, we were about ready to go on vacation, so I had my camera, and I was on my bicycle, and I had a little bag that I put everything in, and I had 2 rolls of film that I was going to take for vacation. And I was riding down Main Street, and all of a sudden I look up, and Tony Corey Chrysler dealership was on fire. And I went, oh my goodness. Well, I had a roll of film in the camera, and I had 1 more in my bag. And so I started taking some pictures. And I took pictures of the fire, the firemen coming in, hooking up the hose, the whole thing, the whole picture story I had. When I went back to the camera shop and I told my dad, he said, what's the matter? And I said, I used all my vacation film. He said, well, what did you take pictures of? And I told him that there had been a fire and I had all those, and he got really excited. He said, well, let's develop it and see what you got. So I also had the second time that I was published in the Mesa Tribune from all of my pictures of the fire. And I even got one of the big plate glass window broke from the heat and had crashing down. It was kind of interesting picture, but so I had that one summer was really what got me going, because I really felt like, you know, wow, that's really fun. And I was really upset because I thought my dad would be angry because I used all my vacation film on one fire. So anytime I'd see a fire, I always tried to carry my camera around. And if you see pictures of me when I was younger, I always had my camera, either this camera or I had a little baby brownie that I'll show you later on, that I carried with me everywhere. So a lot of people ask, why such large cameras? And I think what I described before was, if you wanted a 5x7 print, you had to have a 5x7 camera. And if you wanted an 8x10 print like this, you had to have an 8x10 camera, because enlargers were impractical. They weren't very efficient. The negative material wasn't too good, because if you the negative quality wasn't real good. So when you went to blow it up, it really had a problem. Okay, this is a contact printer. It has a red light in here, and that's to help you position it. When you're all in the dark room, you can position the negative in here so that when you go to print it, the negative goes in here like this. This is adjustable so that you can mask off the sheet like this. A piece of photographic paper goes over the top. This has a little pad on here. It goes down, and when you push down, the light goes on inside for so many seconds, and then you get it up and then develop the paper. So this is why, like, the maximum size you could make with just a regular contact print would be 4x5. Now, the negative material is pretty decent as we developed. And so then you could put it into an enlarger, and it would make, you could make any size. You can make a size like this in back of me, or even smaller, 11x14, 16x20s. So the photo finishing business that I grew up with was really kind of fun, and it taught me a lot. And I think a lot of people today are discovering photography through film and that kind of thing, so that they're thinking, hey, this may be fun to do, because there's still film being made, there's still film cameras being made, in as much as digital has taken over most of the world. Because you know, just a hobby, photography as a hobby has always been very expensive. As you can imagine, some of these cameras, like this camera, this Conley View camera here, this was made by Conley, and it was sold by Sears, and it was $69 in 1917. You could buy one out of the Sears catalog. In fact, probably whoever bought this originally bought it with the Sears catalog. There were a lot of other things. There were a lot of companies that were competing with each other. This is made by Cerakote. It looks very similar to the Conley because, well, it had a little viewfinder here. It had the scale on the side, and they were all pretty much the same. But this was sold by another company. I think Ward's sold this, or one of the other companies, and Sears gradually picked it up, but they had a lot of really good woodworkers and things like that that would put these things together, and they're really actually quite artistic, because a lot of the brass and the red wood, or the red colored wood, the mahogany, and they're very nice. But they were expensive, and a lot of people couldn't afford cameras like this. So what they did is they didn't buy cameras. On the next time, I want to show you how photography changed for the commercial people, and how mainly Kodak decided, hey, we need to come out with something that everybody can use. And so what the marketing plan was, not everybody wanted to be a professional photographer. They just wanted to make good images of their family and on their trips. And it's the same way you would on your iPhone. A lot of people have iPhones. Everybody has a camera with them almost all the time now. And it got that way because, I would say, largely from Kodak, who was the major player in the world for many, many years. Well, we've seen today about why we had large cameras, and how the development of the camera came through with shutters and different lenses, and the format size, from large format to, as it got smaller and smaller, as quality got better. In future episodes, we're going to see how Eastman Kodak was a very, very important part of developing photography for the masses. Most of this was for professional photographers, but the real market was for each family to be able to record their vacations, their families, their kids' pictures, and that kind of thing. So Kodak really put out an effort. In fact, Kodak, from about the 50s through the 80s, was the largest user of silver in the world. And they did that because that was what they put in their film. That's what they made film with. So they did a lot of film, and they sold a lot of film to people. Okay, hope you enjoyed this. I enjoyed showing you my camera collection. This is part of it. Join us next time for more adventures and more cameras on, and see us on Through Larry's Lens. Thank you. And if you look at it, there are different manufacturers. They're actually in different towns.
Next time we do this, if you could stay awake instead of snoring, that would be great.
And you want to see Through Larry's Lens?
Whoa.
Dude, Oscar shout.